Good evening.
Storytelling.
I'm David Sneven, and I'm going to tell you a story. I just got a notification. Oh, it says Heavy D Storytelling is live now.
This is Lego Man. His name is Jeff.
Jeff. That's Jeff. You got another one for us? Okay, so today is the 30th of April. I am going to start with, there's going to be a quiz on that. I'm going to start with Proverbs chapter 3 as I do. We just have 2 more chapters left of Proverbs. So let me know in the comments what book you want me to read next. Or we might read something like Job. Oh, that's a good one, JJ. Put it in the comments, JJ. Just joking. He doesn't have a YouTube account. Ha 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 ha.
I don't even have a phone.
Oh, do let me know when you're live, though. We're live now. Kimmy, can you post a link?
Why does Zelda hate the internet? Why does Damon hate the internet?
All right. Oh, okay, so there's a link. Now we're going to be done with the Steven chat and all right. Ready? Proverbs chapter 30. Okay, now both of you have posted it. That's great. That's just wonderful. Now somebody else is going to post it. Okay. All right. All right, we can stop on the Steven chat. Just put it on the thing now. All right, cool. Proverbs chapter 30. The words of Agur, son of Jakeh, the oracle. The man declares, I am weary, O God. I am weary, O God, and worn out. Surely I am too stupid to be a man. I have not the understanding of a man. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I knowledge of the Holy One, who has ascended to heaven and come down, who has gathered the wind in his fists, who has wrapped up the waters in the garment, who has established all the ends of the earth. What is his name, and what is his son's name? Surely you know. Every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you and you be found a liar. 2 things I ask of you. Deny them not to me before I die. Deny them not to me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. Do not slander a servant to his master, lest he curse you and you be held guilty. There are those who curse their fathers and do not bless their mothers. There are those who there are those who are clean in their own eyes, but are not washed of their filth. There are those, how lofty are their eyes, how high their eyelids lift. There are those whose teeth are swords, whose fangs are knives, to devour the poor from off the earth, the needy from among mankind. The leech has 2 daughters, give and give. 3 things are never satisfied, 4 never say enough. Sheol, the barren womb, the land never satisfied with water, and the fire that never says enough. The eye that mocks a father and scorns to obey a mother will be picked out by the ravens of the valley and eaten by the vultures. 3 things are too wonderful for me, 4 I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a virgin. This is the way of an adulteress. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wrong. Under 3 things the earth trembles, under 4 it cannot bear up. A slave when he becomes king, and a fool when he is filled with food, an unloved woman when she gets a husband, and a maidservant when she displaces her mistress. 4 things on earth are small, but they are exceedingly wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they provide their food in the summer. The rock badgers are a people not mighty, yet they make their homes in the cliffs. The locusts have no king, yet all of them march in rank. The lizard you cannot take in your hands, yet it is in the king's palaces. 3 things are stately in their tread, 4 are stately in their stride. The lion, which is the mightiest among beasts, and does not turn back before any, the strutting rooster, the he-goat, and the king whose army is within him. If you have been foolish, exalting yourself, or if you have been devising evil, put your hand on your mouth, for pressing milk produces curds, pressing the nose produces blood, and pressing anger produces strife. That is Proverbs chapter 30. It looks like we might have Rebecca here. I don't know. I just see one. Are one of y'all on? So Rebecca, if you're there, then say hi. I do not see Rebecca present. So I will start after you're there. We're going to read The Horse and His Boy. We're going to start on chapter 5 tonight. And hopefully we read more than one chapter, but we'll see.
What starts with the ends with the only has one letter in it?
Oh, there she is. Hi, Rebecca. Okay. Wait, what starts with E? What just happened in the... There's a fly. There's a fly in the bathroom. Okay, so at this time, Kimberly is going to give us her synopsis.
Hello. So in the last chapter, someone told a story. I keep forgetting the name. Sorry. It takes me a few chapters to get the names right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Erebus?
Erebus? Yeah.
I think it's Erebus.
Okay, so Erebus and she was supposed to get married to this one guy, and she didn't want to get married to this one guy, so she was like, oh, hey, Dad, can I go into the forest to do the rituals? I'm very happy that I'm going to be getting married. And so she took with her a dagger, and she drugged her servant that was going to go with her, and she was trying to kill herself, but her horse told her not to, and she was like, oh, hey, you want to go to Narnia where we can be free? And she was like, yeah, sure. So then they get chased by the lion, and so they meet the other people who had the exact same idea, and yeah. And so they finished the story telling them about a letter and stuff that told her dad that she was already married with the person that she was going to get married to, and that he should go over to that guy's house. So, yay, great news. And so what happened next was they had to go through a town. They couldn't go around it because it was filled with gardens for miles. So they had to go through it. And then they find a bunch of people, like there's a bunch of royal people or like high-ranking people, and everybody starts like going on the sides like 3 or 4 different times, and so that the party could go through. The third or fourth one happened to be Narnians, and they see wait, yeah, Shasta. They see Shasta, and they're like, "Oh, look at that! It's this person, the prince guy." And then they take him over to their room, and um they're about something important. I'm pretty sure. Important. I said important.
Comment down below if you think she said important.
Oh my gosh, Daniel.
Hey, so which of
Um, I think I know Susan and Edmund are there.
Yep, Susan and Edmund.
Yeah.
Okay.
Comment down below if you think that this video right here will get 1K likes at the end of this year.
I highly doubt it. Same.
Okay, so not embarrassing, but you know, it is what it is. All right, so can't wait for my next one. Darn this computer. Okay, yes. Exciting news. Rebecca is the proud big sister of Daniel, who earned $40 today. Yay! Woo. Yeah, she's the proud big sister.
Yay!
That was exciting news, right? Okay, so now we're gonna move. We're on chapter 5, Prince Corin, and Kimberly, tell us what the first word is. It's not. I forget. I promise. All right. So you know what? I don't think we're glitching today. We're not glitching. That's a miracle. Okay. So chapter 5. Hey, can y'all be quiet so I can read? I'm sorry, what?
I know what the word is.
What's the word?
My.
Okay, he must have looked at it. All right. You were asleep. All right, chapter 5, Prince Corin. Prince Corin. All right, are we going to read or are y'all going to be quiet? All right. Prince Corin. My dear sister and very good lady, said King Edmund, you must now show your courage, for I tell you plainly, we are in no small danger. What is it, Edmund? asked the Queen. It is this, said Edmund. I do not think we shall find it easy to leave Tashbaan. While the prince had hope that you would take him, we were honored guests, but by the lion's mane, I think that as soon as he finds he has your flat denial, we shall be no better than prisoners. Just a minute, I'm going to check on something. JJ.
It's our teddy bear.
All right. Hey, I need you to settle down, okay? Daniel, you too, and you're making noises distracting me. Daniel, that's not an approved activity during story time. I'm not joking. All right, sorry. One of the dwarfs gave a low whistle. I warned your majesties, I warned you, said Shallowpad the raven. Easily in, but not easily out, as the lobster said in the lobster pot. I have been with the prince this morning, continued Edmund. He is little used, more the pity, to having his will crossed, and he is very chafed at your long delays and doubtful answers. This morning he pressed very hard to know your mind. I put it aside, meaning at the same time to diminish his hopes with some light common jests about women's fancies. and hinted that his suit was likely to be cold. He grew angry and dangerous. There was a sort of threatening, though still veiled under a show of courtesy, in every word he spoke. "Yes," said Tumnus, "and when I supped with the Grand Vizier last night, it was the same. He asked me how I liked Tashbaan, and I, for I could not tell him I hated every stone of it and would not lie, told him that now, when high summer was coming on, my heart turned to the cool woods and dewy slopes of Narnia. He gave me a smile that meant no good and said, 'There is nothing to hinder you from dancing there again, little Goatfoot, always provided you leave us in exchange a bride for our prince.'" "Do you mean he would make me his wife by force?" exclaimed Susan. "That's my fear," said Edmund. "Wife or slave, which is worse?" "But how can he? Does the Tisroc think our brother the High King would suffer such an outrage?" "Sire," said Peredin the king, "they would not be so mad. Do they think there are no swords and spears in Narnia?" "Alas," said Edmund, "my guess is that the Tisroc has very small fear of Narnia. We are a little land, and little lands on the borders of a great empire were always hateful to the lords of the great empire. He longs to blot them out, gobble them up. When first he suffered the prince to come to Cair Paravel as your lover, sister, it may be that he was only seeking an occasion against us. Most likely he hopes to make one mouthful of Narnia and Archenland both." "Let him try," said the second dwarf. "At sea we are as big as he is, and if he assaults us by land, he has the desert to cross." "True, friend," said Edmund, "but is the desert a sure defense? What does Shalopad say?" "I know that desert well," said the Raven, "for I have flown above it far and wide in my younger days." You may be sure that Shasta pricked up his ears at this point. "And this is certain, that if the Tisroc goes by the great oasis, he can never lead a great army across it into Archenland. For though they could reach the oasis by the end of their first day's march, yet the springs there would be too little for the thirst of all those soldiers and their beasts. But there is another way." Shasta listened more attentively still. "He that would find that way," said the Raven, "must start from the tombs of the ancient kings and ride northwest so that the double peak of Mount Pyre is always straight ahead of him. And so in a day's riding or a little more, he shall come to the head of a stony valley which is so narrow that a man might be within a furlong of it 1,000 times and never know that it was there. And looking down this valley, he will see neither grass nor water nor anything else good. But if he rides on down it, he will come to a river and can ride by the water all the way into Archenland." "And do the Calormenes know of this western way?" asked the queen. Friends, said Edmund, "what is the use of all this discourse? We are not asking whether Narnia or Calormen would win a war arose between them. We are asking how to save the honor of the queen and our own lives out of this devilish city. For though my brother Peter, the High King, defeated the Tisroc 12 times over, yet long before that day our throats would be cut and the queen's grace would be the wife, or more likely the slave, of this prince." "We have our weapons, King," said the first dwarf, "and this is a reasonably defensible house." "As to that," said the king, "I do not doubt that every one of us would sell our lives dearly in the gate, and they would not come at the queen, but over our dead bodies. Yet we should be merely rats fighting in a trap when all's said." "Very true," croaks the Raven. "These last stands in a house make good stories, but nothing ever came of them. After their first repulses, the enemy always sets the house on fire." "I am the cause of all this," said Susan, bursting into tears. "Oh, if only I had never left Cair Paravel! Our last happy day was before those ambassadors came from Calormen. The moles were planting an orchard for us. Oh, oh. And she buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Courage, Sue, courage, said Edmund. Remember, but what is the matter with you, Master Tumnus? For the fawn was holding both his horns with his hands as if he were trying to keep his head on by them, and writhing to and fro as if he had a pain in his inside. Don't speak to me, don't speak to me, said Tumnus. I'm thinking, so that I can hardly breathe. Wait, do wait. There was a moment's puzzled silence, and then the fawn looked up, drew a long breath, mopped its forehead, and said, the only difficulty is how to get down to our ship, with some stores too, without being seen and stopped. Yes, said the dwarf dryly, just as the beggar's only difficulty about riding is that he has no horse. Wait, said Mr. Tumnus impatiently. All we need is some pretext for going down to our ship today and taking stuff on board. Yes, said King Edmund doubtfully. Well then, said the fawn, how would it be if your majesties bade the prince to a great banquet to be held on board our own galleon, the Splendor Hyaline, tomorrow night, and let the message be worded as graciously as the queen can contrive, without pledging her honor, so as to give the prince a hope that she is weakening. This is very good counsel, sire, croaked the raven. And then, continued Tumnus excitedly, everyone will expect us to be going down to the ship all day, making preparations for our guests, and let some of us go to the bazaars and spend every minim we have at the fruiterers and the sweetmeat sellers and the wine merchants, just as we would if we were really giving a feast. And let us order magicians and jugglers and dancing girls and flute players, all to be on board tomorrow night. I see, said King Edmund, rubbing his hands. And then, said Tumnus, we'll all be on board tonight, and as soon as it is quite dark, up sails and out oars, said the king. And so to sea, cried Tumnus, leaping up and beginning to dance. And our nose northward, said the first dwarf. Running for home, hurrah for Narnia and the north, said the other. And the prince, waking next morning and finding the birds flown, said Paridon, clapping his hands. Oh, Master Tumnus, dear Master Tumnus, said the queen, catching his hands and swinging with him as he danced. You have saved us all. And here is a picture of Susan and Tumnus dancing. Yeah. Okay. The prince will chase us, said another lord, whose name Shasta had not heard. That's the least of my fears, said Edmund. I have seen all the shipping in the river, and there's no tall ship of war, nor swift galley there. I wish he may chase us, for the Splendor Hyaline could sink anything he has to send after her, if we were overtaken at all. Sire, said the raven, you shall hear no better plot than the fawn's, though we sat in council for 7 days. And now, as we birds say, nests before eggs, which is as much as to say, let us all take our food, and then at once be about our business. Everyone arose at this, and the doors were opened, and the lords and the creatures stood aside for the kings and queens to go out first. Shasta wondered what he ought to do, but Mr. Tumnus said, lie there, your highness, and I will bring you a little feast to yourself in a few moments. There is no need for you to move until we are all ready to embark. Shasta laid his head down again on the pillows, and soon he was alone in the room. JJ, what's up? Okay, JJ needs to say something to Mom. Yay! So this title of this chapter is Prince Corin, and so far Prince Corin hasn't said anything. Actually, joke's on them, Prince Corin's not actually even in the room.
Well, first I want to show Becca, then I'm gonna to yeah. Becca, I lost a tooth. I'm waiting till Becca says.
I forgot to say that. I thought. What? Well, we'll have to write the Tooth Fairy an email then.
She might not answer.
Okay, well, last night. All right. Lost my place. Which is much to say, let all of everyone arose at this, and the doors were opened, and the lords and the creatures stood aside for the kings and queens to go out first. Shasta wondered what he ought to do, but Mr. Tumnus said, "Lie there, your highness, and I will bring you up a little feast yourself in a few moments. There is no need for you to move until we are all ready to embark." Shasta laid his head down again on the pillows, and soon he was alone in the room. This is all perfectly dreadful, thought Shasta. It never came into his head to tell the Narnians the whole truth and ask for their help. Having been brought up by a hard, close-fisted man like Arshish, he had a fixed habit of never telling grown-ups anything if he could help it. He thought they would always spoil or stop whatever you were trying to do, and he thought that even if the Narnian king might be friendly to the two horses because they were talking beasts of Narnia, he would hate Aravis because she was a Calormene, and either sell her for a slave or send her back to her father. As for himself, I simply daren't tell them that I'm not Prince Corin now, thought Shasta. I've heard all their plans. If they knew I wasn't one of themselves, they'd never let me out of this house alive. They'd be afraid I'd betray them to this Tisroc. They'd kill me, and if the real Corin turns up, it'll all come out, and they will. He had, you see, no idea of how noble and free-born people behave. How noble and free-born people behave. What am I to do? What am I to do? He kept saying to himself. What? Hello, there comes a goaty little creature again. The fawn trotted in, half dancing, with a tray in its hands which was nearly as large as itself. Then he sat on an inlaid table beside Shasta's sofa and sat down himself on the carpeted floor with his goaty legs crossed. "Now, princeling," he said, "make a good dinner. It will be your last meal in Tashbaan." It was a fine meal after the Calormene fashion. I don't know whether you would have liked it or not, but Shasta did. There were lobsters and salad and snipe stuffed with almonds and truffles, and a complicated dish made of chicken livers and rice and raisins and nuts. And there were cool melons and gooseberry fools and mulberry fools, and every kind of nice thing that can be made with ice. There was also a little flagon of the sort of wine that is called white, though it is really yellow. Oh.
Yeah, I remember. I was just in my story last night.
Okay. While Shasta was eating, the good little fawn, who thought he was still dazed with sunstroke, kept talking to him about the fine times he would have when they all got home, about his good old father Loon of Archenland and the little castle where he lived on the southern slopes of the pass. "And don't forget," said Mr. Tumnus, "that you are promised your first suit of armor and your first war horse on your next birthday, and then your highness will begin to learn how to tilt and joust. And in a few years, if all goes well, King Peter has promised your royal father that he himself will make you knight at Cair Paravel, and in that meantime there will be plenty of comings and goings between Narnia and Archenland across the neck of the mountains. And of course, you remember you have promised to come for a whole week to stay with me for the summer festival, and there'll be bonfires all night, dances of fauns and dryads in the heart of the woods, and who knows, we might see Aslan himself. When the meal was over, the fawn told Shasta, "Hey, Digby, I hear you talking. I know you're not paying attention if you're talking. I'm trying to read. You've got all day that you can talk to Daniel. You're supposed to be settling down." When the meal was over, the fawn told Shasta to stay quietly where he was, and it wouldn't do you any harm to have a little sleep, he added. "I'll call you in plenty of time to get on board, and then home, Narnia and the North." Shasta had so enjoyed his dinner and all the things Tumnus had been telling him that when he was left alone, his thoughts took a different turn. He only hoped that now the real Prince Corin would not turn up until it was too late, and that he would be taken away to Narnia by ship. I am afraid he did not think at all of what might happen to the real Corin when he was left behind in Tashbaan. He was a little worried about Aravis and Bree waiting for him at the tombs, but then he said to himself, well, how can I help it? And anyhow, that Aravis thinks she's too good to go about with me, so she can jolly well go on alone. And at the same time, he couldn't help feeling that it would be much nicer going to Narnia by sea than toiling across the desert. When he had thought all this, he did what I expect you would have done if you had been up very early and had had a long walk and a great deal of excitement and then a very good meal and were lying on a sofa in a cool room with no noise in it except when a bee came buzzing in through the wide open windows. He fell asleep. What woke him was a loud crash. He jumped up off the sofa, staring. He saw at once, from the mere look of the room, the lights and shadows all looked different, that he must have slept for several hours. He saw also what had made the crash. A costly porcelain vase, which had been standing on the windowsill, lay on the floor, broken into about 30 pieces. But he hardly noticed all these things. What he did notice was two hands gripping the windowsill from outside. They gripped harder and harder, getting white at the knuckles, and then up came a head and a pair of shoulders. A moment later, there was a boy of Shasta's own age sitting astride the sill with one leg hanging down inside the room. Shasta had never seen his own face in a looking glass. Even if he had, he might not have realized that the other boy was, at ordinary times, almost exactly like himself. At the moment, this boy was not particularly like anyone, for he had the finest black eye you had ever seen, and a tooth missing, and his clothes, which must have been splendid ones when he put them on, were torn and dirty, and there was both blood and mud on his face. "Who are you?" said the boy in a whisper. "Are you Prince Corin?" said Shasta. "Yes, of course," said the other. "But who are you?" "I'm nobody. Nobody in particular, I mean," said Shasta. "King Edmund caught me in the street and mistook me for you. I suppose we must look like one another. Can I get out the way you've got in?" "Yes, if you're really good at climbing," said Corin. "But why are you in such a hurry? I say, we ought to be able to get some fun out of this being mistaken for one another." No, said Shasta. "We must change places at once. It'll be simply frightful if Mr. Tumnus comes back and finds us both here. I've had to pretend to be you, and you're starting tonight. Secretly. And where were you all this time?" "A boy in the street made a beastly joke about Queen Susan," said Prince Corin, "so I knocked him down. He ran howling into a house, and his big brother came out, so I knocked the big brother down. Then they all followed me until we ran into 3 old men with spears who are called the Watch. So I fought the Watch, and they knocked me down. It was getting dark by now. Then the Watch took me along to lock me up somewhere, so I asked them if they'd like a stoup of wine, and they said they didn't mind if they did. Then I took them to a wine shop and got them some, and they all sat down and drank till they fell asleep. I thought it was time for me to be off, so I came out quietly, and then I found the first boy, the one who had started all the trouble, still hanging about. So I knocked him down again. After that, I climbed up a pipe onto the roof of a house and lay quiet till it began to get light this morning. Ever since that, I've been finding my way back. I say, is there anything to drink?" No, I drank it, said Shasta. And now show me how you got in. That there's not a moment to lose. You better lie down on the sofa and pretend, but I forgot. It'll be no good with all those bruises and the black eye. You'll just have to tell them the truth once I'm safely away. What else did you think I'd be telling them? Asked the prince with a rather angry look. And who are you? There's no time, said Shasta in a frantic whisper. I am a Narnian, I believe, something northern anyway, but I've been brought up all my life in Calormen, and I'm escaping across the desert with a talking horse called Bree. And now, quick, how do I get away? Look, said Corin, drop from this window onto the roof of the veranda, but you must do it lightly on your toes or someone will hear you. Then along to your left, and you can get up to the top of that wall if you're any good at all as a climber. Then along the wall to the corner, drop onto the rubbish heap you will find outside, and there you are. Thanks, said Shasta, who was already sitting on the sill. The two boys were looking into each other's faces and suddenly found that they were friends. Goodbye, said Corin, and good luck. I do hope you get safe away. Goodbye, said Shasta. I say, you have been having some adventures. Nothing to yours, said the prince. Now drop lightly, I say, he added as Shasta dropped. I hope we meet in Archenland. Go to my father, King Lune, and tell him you're a friend of mine. Look out, I hear someone coming. The end of chapter 5. Chapter 6 is called Shasta Among the Tombs. The first word is Shasta. And I don't know if I'm up for another chapter. I'm really sorry. I know it's short. Okay, who says one more chapter? What? Who's asleep? I'm asleep? JJ's asleep, I can tell, just by looking at him. Let me have that. That's not a toy. This was an accessory that came with his bed, and I never figured out how to put it on it. So there it is. Okay, I see 2 viewers. Yay! Okay, Rebecca says one more. This one's kind of short, so I'll see if I can do it. All right, chapter 6. One more. That's going to be it tonight, though. Okay, I'm just not feeling it. I'm sorry. Daniel, I told you that's not an approved activity during story time. Daniel, right? Okay, put them away. We need them to be away so that we don't step on them if there's an emergency in the middle of the night. Right? Excuse me. Daniel, I'm waiting. Okay, well, the point of this isn't to be building stuff, it's to be settling down. Daniel, you don't need to talk back to me like that. All right, Daniel, we're just wait. I'm giving you a minute. That's what I'm doing. All right. Chapter 6, Shasta Among the Tombs. Shasta ran lightly along the roof on tiptoes. It felt hot to his bare feet. It was only a few seconds scrambling up the wall at the far end, and when he got to the corner, he found himself looking down into a narrow, smelly street, and there was a rubbish heap against the outside of the wall, just as Corin had told him. In England, they call rubbish, that's what they call trash. We call it trash, they call it rubbish. A rubbish heap, blah, 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 blah. But before jumping down, he took a rapid glance around him to get his bearings. Apparently, he had now come over the crown of the island hill on which Tashbaan is built. Everything sloped away before him, flat roofs below flat roofs, down to the towers and battlements of the city's northern wall. Beyond that was the river, and beyond the river was a short slope covered with gardens. But beyond that again, there was something he had never seen the like of, a great yellowish gray thing, flat as a calm sea and stretching out for miles. On the far side of it were huge blue things, lumpy but with jagged edges, and some of them with white tops. The desert, the mountains, thought Shasta. He jumped down onto the rubbish and began trotting along downhill as fast as he could in the narrow lane, which soon brought him into a wider street where there were more people. No one bothered to look at a little ragged boy running along on bare feet. Still, he was anxious and uneasy till he turned a corner and there saw the city gate in front of him. Here he was pressed and jostled a bit, for a good many other people were also going out, and on the bridge beyond the gate the crowd became quite a slow procession, more like a queue than a crowd. A queue is what they call a line. We call it a line, they call it a queue. More like a queue than a crowd. So stand in line, stand in the queue, it's the same thing. Out there with clear running water on each side, it was deliciously fresh after the smell and heat and noise of Tashbaan. When once Shasta had reached the far end of the bridge, he found the crowd melting away. Everyone seemed to be going either to the left or the right along the riverbank. He went straight ahead, up a road that did not appear to be much used between gardens. In a few paces he was alone, and a few more brought him to the top of the slope. There he stood and stared. It was like coming to the end of the world, for all the grass stopped quite suddenly a few feet before him, and the sand began. Endless level sand like on a seashore, but a bit rougher because it was never wet. The mountains, which now looked further off than before, loomed ahead. Greatly to his relief, he saw about 5 minutes' walk away on his left what must certainly be the tombs, just as Bree had described them. Great masses of moldering stone shaped like gigantic beehives, but a little narrower. They looked very black and grim, for the sun was now setting right behind him. He turned his face west and trotted toward the tombs. He could not help looking out very hard for any sign of his friends, though the setting sun shone in his face so that he could see hardly anything. And anyway, he thought, of course they'll be round on the far side of the farthest tomb, not on this side where anyone might see them from the city. Here he is looking at the tombs. All right. There were about 12 tombs, each with a low arched doorway that opened into absolute blackness. They were dotted about in no kind of order, so that it took a long time going round this one and going round that one before you could be sure you had looked round every side of every tomb. This is what Shasta had to do. There was nobody there. It was very quiet here out on the edge of the desert, and now the sun had really set. Suddenly, from somewhere behind him, there came a terrible sound. Shasta's heart gave a great jump, and he had to bite his tongue to keep himself from screaming. Next moment, he realized what it was, the horns of Tashbaan blowing for the closing of the gates. Don't be a silly little coward, said Shasta to himself. Why, it's only the same noise you heard this morning, but there is a difference between the noise heard letting you in with your friends in the morning and a noise heard alone at nightfall shutting you out. And now that the gates were shut, he knew there was no chance of the others joining him that evening. Either they're shut up in Tashbaan for the night, thought Shasta, or else they've gone on without me. It's just the sort that Aravis would do, but Bree wouldn't. Oh, he wouldn't. Now, would he? What, Daniel? No, it's not. In this idea about Aravis, Shasta was once more quite wrong. She was proud and could be hard enough, but she was as true as steel and would never have deserted a companion, whether she liked him or not. Now that Shasta knew he would have to spend the night alone, it was getting darker every moment. He began to like the look of the place less and less. There was something very uncomfortable about those great silent shapes of stone. He had been trying his hardest for a long time not to think of ghouls, but he couldn't keep it up any longer. Ow! Ow! Help! He shouted suddenly, for at that very moment he felt something touch his leg. I don't like anyone. I don't think anyone can be blamed for shouting if something comes up from behind and touches him, not in such a place and at such a time when he is frightened already. Shasta, at any rate, was too frightened to run. Anything would be better than being chased round and round the burial place of the ancient kings with something he dared not look at behind him. Instead, he did what was really the most sensible thing he could do. He looked round, and his heart almost burst with relief. What had touched him was only a cat. The light was too bad now for Shasta to see much of the cat, except that it was big and very solemn. It looked as if it might have lived for long, long years among the tombs alone. Its eyes made you think it knew secrets it would not tell. Puss, puss, said Shasta, I suppose you're not a talking cat. The cat stared at him harder than ever. Then it started walking away, and of course Shasta followed it, led him right through the tombs and out onto the desert side of them. There it sat down bolt upright with its tail curled round its feet and its face set toward the desert and toward Narnia and the north, as still as if it were watching for some enemy. Shasta lay down beside it with its back against the cat and his face toward the tombs because of if one is nervous, there's nothing like having your face toward the danger and having something warm and solid at your back. The sand wouldn't have seemed very comfortable to you, but Shasta had been sleeping on the ground for weeks and hardly noticed it. Very soon he fell asleep, though even in his dreams he went on wondering what had happened to Bree and Aravis and Hwin. He was wakened suddenly by a noise he had never heard before. Perhaps it was only a nightmare, said Shasta to himself. At the same moment, he noticed that the cat had gone from his back, and he wished it hadn't. But he lay quite still without even opening his eyes, because he felt sure he would be more frightened if he sat up and looked round at the tombs and the loneliness, just as you or I might lie still with your bedclothes over our heads. But then the noise came again, a harsh, piercing cry from behind him out of the desert. Then, of course, he had to lay open his eyes and sit up. The moon was shining brightly. The tombs, far bigger and nearer than he had thought they would be, looked gray in the moonlight. In fact, they looked horribly like huge people draped in gray robes that covered their heads and faces. They were not at all nice things to have near you when spending a night alone in a strange place, but the noise had come from the opposite side, from the desert. Shasta had to turn his back on the tombs, he didn't like that much, and stare out across the level sand. The wild cry rang out again. I hope it's not more lions, thought Shasta. It was, in fact, not very like the lion's roars. Not very like the lion's roars he had heard on the night when they met Hwin and Aravis, and was really the cry of a jackal. But of course Shasta did not know this. Even if he had known, he would not have wanted very much to meet a jackal. The cries rang out again and again. There's more than one of them, whatever they are, thought Shasta, and they're coming nearer. I suppose that if he had been an entirely sensible boy, he would have gone back through the tombs nearer to the river where there were houses and wild beasts would be less likely to come. But then there were, or he thought there were, the ghouls. To go back through the tombs would mean going past those dark openings in the tombs and what might come out of them. It may have been silly, but Shasta felt he had rather risked the wild beasts. Then, as the cries came nearer and nearer, he began to change his mind. He was just going to run for it when suddenly, between him and the desert, a huge animal bounded into view. As the moon was behind it, it looked quite black, and Shasta did not know what it was except that it had very big shaggy head and went on 4 legs. It did not seem to have noticed Shasta, for it suddenly stopped, turned its head toward the desert, and let out a roar which re-echoed through the tombs and seemed to shake the sand under Shasta's feet. The cries of the other creatures suddenly stopped, and he thought he could hear feet scampering away. Then the great beast turned to examine Shasta. It's a lion. I know it's a lion, thought Shasta. I'm done. I wonder, will it hurt much? I wish it was over. I wonder, does anything happen to people after they're dead? Oh, here it comes! And he shut his eyes and teeth tight. But instead of teeth and claws, he only felt something warm lying down at his feet. And when he opened his eyes, he said, "Why, it's not nearly as big as I thought. It's only half the size. No, it isn't even a quarter the size. I do declare, it's only the cat. I must have dreamed all of that about its being as big as a horse." And whether he really had been dreaming or not, what was now at his feet and staring him out of countenance with its big green unwinking eyes was the cat, though certainly one of the largest cats he had ever seen. "Oh, Puss," gasped Shasta, "I am so glad to see you again. I've been having such horrible dreams." And he at once lay down again, back to back with the cat, as they had been at the beginning of the night. The warmth from it spread all over him. "I'll never do anything nasty to the cat again as long as I live," said Shasta, half to the cat and half to himself. "I did once, you know. I threw stones at a half-starved, mangy old stray. Hey, stop that!" For the cat had turned round and given him a scratch. "None of that," said Shasta. "It isn't as if you could understand what I'm saying." Then he dozed off. The next morning when he woke, the cat was gone. The sun was already up and the sand hot. Shasta, very thirsty, sat up and rubbed his eyes. The desert was blindingly white, and though there was a murmur of noises from the city behind him, where he sat everything was perfectly still. When he looked a little left and west so that the sun was not in his eyes, he could see the mountains on the far side of the desert, so sharp and clear that they looked only a stone's throw away. He particularly noticed one blue height that divided into 2 peaks at the top and decided it must be Mount Fire. "That's our direction, judging by what the raven said," he thought, "so I'll just make sure of it so as not to waste any time when the others show up." So he made a good, deep, straight furrow with his foot, pointing exactly to Mount Fire. The next job clearly was to get something to eat and to drink. Shasta trotted back through the tombs. They looked quite ordinary now, and he wondered how he could ever have been afraid of them. And down into the cultivated land by the river's side. There were a few people about, but not very many, for the city gates had been open several hours and the early morning crowds had already gone in, so he had no difficulty in doing a little raiding, as Bree called it. It involved a climb over a garden wall, and the results were 3 oranges, a melon, a fig or 2, and a pomegranate. After that he went down to the river bank, but not too near the bridge, and had a drink. The water was so nice that he took off his hot, dirty clothes and had a dip, for of course Shasta had lived on the shore all his life, had learned to swim almost as soon as he had learned to walk. When he came out, he lay on the grass looking across the water at Tashbaan, all the splendor and strength and glory of it, but that made him remember the dangers of it too. He suddenly realized that the others might have reached the tombs while he was bathing and gone without me as likely as not, so he dressed in a fright and tore back at such speed that he was all hot and thirsty when he arrived, and so the good of his bathe was gone. Like most days when you are alone and waiting for something, this day seemed about 100 hours long. He had plenty to think of course, but sitting alone just thinking is pretty slow. He thought a good deal about the Narnians and especially about Corin. He wondered what had happened when they discovered the boy who had been lying on the sofa, and hearing all their secret plans wasn't really Corin after all. It was very unpleasant to think of all those nice people imagining him a traitor. But as soon as the sun slowly climbed up to the top of the sky, and then slowly began going downward to the west, and no one came and nothing at all happened, he began to get more and more anxious. And of course, he now realized that when they arranged to wait for one another at the tombs, no one had said anything about how long he couldn't wait here for the rest of his life. And soon it would be dark again, and he would have another night just like the last night. A dozen different plans went through his head, all wretched ones, and at last he fixed on the worst plan of all. He decided to wait till it was dark and then go back to the river and steal as many melons as he could carry, and set out for Mount Pyre alone, trusting for his direction to the line he had drawn that morning in the sand. It was a crazy idea, and if he had read as many books as you have about journeys over deserts, he would never have dreamt it. But Shasta had read no books at all. Before the sun set, something did happen. Shasta was sitting in the shadow of one of the tombs when he looked up and saw two horses coming toward him. Then his heart gave a great leap, for he recognized them as Bree and Hwin, but the next moment his heart went down into his toes again. There was no sign of Aravis. The horses were being led by a strange man, an armed man, pretty handsomely dressed, like an upper slave in a great family. Bree and Hwin were no longer got up like pack horses, but saddled and bridled. And what could it all mean? It's a trap, thought Shasta. Somebody has caught Aravis, and perhaps they've tortured her, and she's given the whole thing away. They want me to jump out and run up and speak to Bree, then I'll be caught too. And yet if I don't, I may be losing my only chance to meet the others. Oh, I do wish I knew what had happened. And he skulked behind the tomb, looking out every few moments and wondering which was the least dangerous thing to do. The next least dangerous thing to do. Chapter 7 is called Aravis in Tashban, and the first word is what. And we will start there tomorrow with our story from Heavy D Storytelling. This is The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis, one of my top 7 books written about the Chronicles of Narnia. And I hope that you're enjoying the story, and we will come back again tomorrow. God bless you and good night. Yay!